This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by Agenda. Learn more at www.agenda.com. Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
The iPad was the first time that it sort of brought together that everything I thought that I needed as an attorney, because instead of having that legal pad that I would take notes on, I would take notes right there on the iPad. Originally, it was all third-party styluses because this was before the days of the Apple stylus, and I used to use them with all sorts of apps, and then eventually Apple came out with the pencil, and apps came around. So all of my notes I would just take digitally, and that was so transformative because then I would have them with me forever. There was unlimited space. I didn't have to worry about finding something I stuck in a file cabinet. I could search them. So if I have like a digital notebook of a case that I'm working on, like the Jones versus Smith case, and I'm like, gosh, I know that like 8 months ago I wrote something about something, I can instantly find it from searches. It just completely changed my practice.
Welcome to another episode of iPad Pros. Joining me today is Jeff Richardson, an attorney practicing law in New Orleans at the law office of Adams and Reese LLP. His practice areas include appellate litigation and representing defendants in class action and complex litigation. He is an Appellate Practice Specialist certified by the Louisiana Board of Legal Specialization and is currently one of only 13 attorneys in Louisiana with that certification and has been practicing law since 1994. In this episode, we dive into how the iPad has transformed his work and has done so since the very first iPad was released. We also chat a bit on the potential for artificial intelligence as an attorney and what the ramifications may be. My thanks to Agenda 19 for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Download Agenda today for free from the App Store. Learn more at www.agenda.com. I'll be sharing more about Agenda a bit later on in this episode. If you want to support the podcast, go out and try Agenda. It's the app I use to organize and prepare for all my podcast interviews. Early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros is available by subscribing in Apple Podcasts or supporting the Patreon at patreon.com/iPadPros. My thanks to everyone that supports the show. With that, here's my interview with Jeff. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Hi.
I'm excited for this chat. You use the iPad as an attorney and doing law and all that good stuff. And so we're going to dive into all of that, but I'm curious if you just, introduce yourself just briefly about your kind of background and what your current iPad setup is these days.
Sure. So my day job is I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney here in New Orleans for 30 years. I've also been a tech enthusiast for my entire life, way back to the 1980s when I used to use all sorts of computers ranging from the Timex, the Sinclair ZX81 up through the Commodore 64 and my original Mac Plus that I purchased when I was in college. Been a big fan of mobile technology over the years. Pretty much ever since I started my law firm in 1994, I've been involved with the technology that we use as lawyers on our technology committee. So tech has always been something that's been important to me. And then I purchased my first iPhone in 2008, and I've been a happy iPhone user ever since. Soon after that, I started a website called iPhoneJD.com because, lawyers are Juris Doctors, JDs. And so I have been writing about lawyers and other professionals using the iPhone to get work done ever since 2008. And then for the last 3 years, I've had a podcast that I'll talk about sort of at the end today that I do with Brett Burney called In the News, where we talk about the news of note in the world of Apple mobile technology. So that's sort of about who I am. I've got my lawyer job, and then I've got my tech hat. And in terms of my setup, I love Apple mobile technology. I'm not a big, I do have a Mac at home, so I do use an iMac at home. But for me, the big stuff is not the Mac. For me, the big stuff is the mobile technology. So I have my iPhone, and I've got the latest and greatest iPhone 15 Pro Max and stuff. And I just purchased when it went on sale, was it a month or two ago? The new iPad M4, which I absolutely love, and I know we'll talk more detail with that. But I am a huge iPad user. I've been using the iPad ever since 2010 when it first came out. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I'm the same way as far as I was enamored by the iPad, and I only recently got a Mac, mainly because the Apple Vision Pro and how great it is. And there's just a keyboard and trackpad. Indeed. And I tore off the screen, as I've shared before. And
that's too funny, yeah.
It's a great input device for that. But the iPad is kind of where it's been for me. And, the Vision Pro is adding to the mix there as well. And then the Mac is kind of this, it's a thing that's out there, but, not really my main thing, just like you. And as we'll talk about, Windows kind of has to be in your world for law and kind of the applications you need there. As far as the law you practice, what do you have a specialty? Like, what kind of do you focus on there?
Yeah, I do. Although I do have a varied practice, the biggest part of my practice is being an appellate attorney. So when cases go to trial, other attorneys will take the case to trial, and then when that trial is over, people will hire me, typically on the defense side, either to try to get a verdict that's really big reversed on appeal, or if they were successful at the trial court level, to defend that on appeal. So that's a big part of my practice, is being an appellate lawyer. Certainly more than half of my practice, and I do some other stuff too, typically representing companies and stuff on the defense side of cases. It is incredibly rare for me to be on the plaintiff side. So I'm not the person that is, suing the big company. I'm usually the person representing the company when someone else is trying to sue them, and that's what I do. But because so much of my practice is appellate, it means that I am very document oriented. I think all attorneys are by their nature, but unlike an attorney who is trying to do a compelling song and dance before a jury with exhibits and demonstratives and all of that flair, although it is fun and I enjoy doing it from time to time, so much of what I'm doing is the trial is over. Court reporters have written everything down, so it's all in black and white. Exhibits are in a document form, and so I'm dealing with a record. Everything is in a PDF type format, and that is what the appellate court is looking at, because they were not sitting there in the jury box. They're just looking at the documents and the transcripts and stuff, and I am trying to help my clients craft the best argument that they can to be as persuasive as possible, either to get the judgment reversed or affirmed, depending upon what the circumstances are. And so I have a very document-intensive practice, which plays right into.
Super interesting. Yeah, that's kind of law that I didn't realize was the specialty, and it makes sense that it is, all these appeals and stuff. It sounds kind of interesting. You're let me try to, we already know what they said, as far as the verdict. Let's try to coax what's here and just look at a different angle and kind of figure it out, kind of a different a puzzle almost in a way.
Yeah. It is a specialized area of law. There's not many attorneys. I mean, for example, here where I live in Louisiana, we have an appellate specialization for appellate practice, and I think there's currently only 13 of us who have been specialized in this area. Now, there's more than 13 people in Louisiana that do this type of law. They just don't happen to have that specialization I was talking about. But it does give you a sense of it is a very narrow area of law. And I think that's after you've been doing anything in your life for as long as I have, 30 years, you're going to often tend to specialize in your little neck of the woods, whatever it is that you do. And so many different lawyers are specialists in fields that I know nothing about at all, whether it be taxes or estates or wills or whatever. But for me, this is my little corner of the law, and I absolutely love it. I love my job.
That's great. Yeah, and with the M4 iPad Pro, you went with the big one, the 13-inch. Were you tempted to go with Nano-Texture at all, being in New Orleans, lots of sun and all that, and different offices as well with reflections and yeah.
Well, if I was practicing law outside, sitting on the banks of the Mississippi River, then yes, perhaps I would need that Nano-Texture. That was when I was looking at the M4 that came out this year. Let me back up a little bit. I've been using the iPhone for forever, since the 2010, and a big revolutionary change for me was when the first iPad Pro came out in 2015, I guess that was, because that gave us the option, in fact, it was the only option for the original one, to have that larger iPad. And at the time, I was like, gosh, do I want an iPad that's the size of a cafeteria tray or something? I mean, that seemed a little bizarre. And so when I first got it, I got to tell you, Tim, that first week, I was like, uh-oh, I made a mistake. It's too big, it's too big to carry on. But then after about a week or two, I got used to the larger size. And then once I got used to carrying around that larger size, oh my goodness, did I love it. Because having that 12.9-inch size meant that I could, when I'm looking at documents, like a regular document would be like 8.5 by 11, or if it's legal size, 8.5 by 14, they're basically almost full size on an iPad, especially if you take the margins out. In fact, when it's in landscape mode, they're even bigger than full size. And so for someone like me that's working with so many documents, whether it's Microsoft Word files or PDF files, just having those bigger documents was fantastic. Or if I'm working with an exhibit, like maybe it's a case that involves some complicated piece of machinery, and there's some schematic that was drafted, to be able to see that exhibit in a large larger, more vibrant screen, that just having more space was so key. So that was one part of it. So then, you fast forward to that when the M4 came out this year, of course, that was great that the M4 came out in the 2 sizes, but I have long since made the decision that I definitely want the larger size of 12.9 or 12.9 or what Apple now calls 13-inch. So you're right. The other decision was that texture on it. And I didn't get the Nano-Texture for 2 reasons. One is I didn't think I needed it because, like I sort of joked before, I'm not often outside, even though I often do live in an office underneath fluorescent lights.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, indoor, I've noticed, I have the Nano-Texture for the 11-inch, and I was going to say, indoors, it's just, I have my old M1 with the glossy, of course, and it's just comical, like, sitting in places I used to sit to before and didn't really care about the glare, but now I've got the Nano-Texture, like, oh, you can live in a place without glare at your screen.
Yeah.
It's kind of,
and I've seen the videos online of people comparing it, and I'm like, wow, that really works pretty well. But for me, by its very nature, a portable device like an iPad, by its very nature, I can turn it whatever direction I want. So I just don't even think about turning it in a way that glare is not a problem.
I see.
So I didn't think I needed it.
Yeah.
But then the other part was I was afraid, and in fact, I'm curious to hear what you say about this. In fact, I have heard you talk about it, so I know it's not a big issue as I was afraid it was going to be. You know where I'm going. In the past, I have had these these screen protectors on an iPad that were both to provide protection, but one of the selling points of them is that they would give you a different texture to write on, and that it would make it feel, as they claimed, more like you were writing on paper or something like that. And I thought, let me try this. And I have never liked them. I just have not wanted to change that feel. I really like the way the stylus feels against the screen. I was afraid that a Nano-Texture screen would have a different feeling for the stylus, which we're going to talk about in a second. I love using my stylus. Now, having said that, I think I've heard people like you say that it actually doesn't really feel that different. Is that correct?
It doesn't. The thing that feels more different is your fingers, especially in summer. I got the sweaty fingers a little bit. I can tell in the bezel, like my fingers stick into the screen a little bit more. The Nano-Texture, it just feels better to touch, like tactily. Like it's my fingers not like caught on the glass as much. Like I'm not sure if that makes sense, but if you like try to like it seems like the sweat doesn't like and my fingers doesn't make it catch as much. It's a more it feels better to touch basically, and to me at least.
The other thing I was concerned about is one of the things that I was sort of looking forward to, and rightfully so, because it's amazing. The screen on this M4, it is so bright. It is so beautiful. I mean, it reminds me a couple of years ago when I upgraded from a television that I used to think was pretty good, a plasma, TV in our family room, to an OLED 4K HDR TV made by LG, which was just so amazing. You watch these clips that are made to make HDR pop, and you're like, oh my goodness, it looks so realistic. It's like I can touch my TV screen.
Yeah.
And this iPad is the same way. And admittedly, when I'm working with a Microsoft Word document, the fact that my bold looks really vibrant. My bold, look at those subtitles, how amazing they are. But it's a little silly. But the times when I look at photographs or videos or something, it is just beautiful. I was curious / afraid that the Nano-Texture might interfere with that at all. Again, I don't think that I've heard that that's true in practice. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't have a non-Nano-Texture version to compare it against for the OLED, but I can say it looks beautiful. And if you're like using the iPad pitch darkness, it looks the same to me as if it was glossy. I'd say probably like the blacks are there. Like it seems like, I don't know. The trade-off to me is it's better. It's a better experience in more environments than the couple environments where it might be better with the glossy, but it's a mobile device where I want to be able to use it anywhere, and it's really nice being able to use it anywhere. And eventually I'll probably do some more videos on YouTube and stuff, and being able to just point a camera at the iPad, not worry about the camera being in the shot, is going to be nice.
Yeah, that's very nice. So for me, the Nano-Texture wasn't something I thought that I needed, and I had some fears that maybe weren't that justified. But extra cost. But I mean, if nothing else, why spend the extra cost on something if I'm really not going to use it that much?
Yeah.
So
were you a 1 terabyte user anyways, or would that be an upgrade?
I was. Yeah, and I thought about that because you have to get the 1 terabyte to get the Nano-Texture, of course. I have the 512 version. Okay. My previous iPad, which had been the M1 version, which I loved, I love my M1, was also 512. oftentimes when I transition to a new model, you always have that decision, should I take this opportunity to add more memory? And I thought about it especially hard this time because one of the things that attracted me to this new iPad was the M4 being so powerful. I mean, as we know, more powerful than even what you could get on Macs at the time. I'm like, this iPad's going to last a long time. Unlike iPhones, where I tend to get the new model every year just to have the latest and greatest, especially the camera improvements. For an iPad, I'll hold on to them for a few years. I had that M1, which has been around for 3 years now, and I was very happy with it. And so I knew, how much space am I using today? How much space do I think I'll be using for the next couple of years? And I had decided that for me, although I do use the 512 that I previously had, a big portion of that was just me taking up extra space with home videos of my kids that I just keep on the iPad just because I've got space for it. But do I really need them there? Nah, not really. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be okay. And I say that again, even as an attorney that is very document intensive, sometimes these PDF files and these exhibits for trials can take up, gigabytes and gigabytes of space. But even so, not so much that I thought that I needed the 1 terabyte option. So if I didn't need the 1 terabyte option, and if I had those misgivings, I got the Nano anyway, and I would have to pay extra for it, it wasn't necessary. I mean, again, I'm not lying to you. I thought about it. I thought about it for a little while, but I feel pretty comfortable with the decision that I made.
Yeah, and you save the $200 on the RAM upgrade as well, which is bundled into that price. I kind of it's funny. I went one terabyte back when the M1 came out, and I'm kind of stuck at 1 terabyte now because it's really hard to go down in size. Your backups are big, and they grow because I'll have ferrite that's like a huge application now with all that audio, and I'm bad about archiving it sometimes. So that is definitely a thing. As you grow in space, it's hard to go down in size. And this 11-inch is replacing my 7 to 8 year old 10.5-inch second gen iPad Pro. So as you said, these things do last a long time.
Yeah, it's really audio and video though. I mean, you can easily fill up an iPad or an iPhone for that matter, with video and to a certain degree audio, but especially video. HK, to switch over to the iPhone for a second, all the videos that I take on my iPhone are in the 4K, the highest quality possible, because I'm taking videos of my kids doing things that years from now I want to look back at and think they're cute. So of course I want to get the highest quality possible, but that is something that takes up space. And I have a workflow that when I take videos of my daughter's basketball games on my iPhone, I take them in that highest quality, but I very quickly move them off my iPhone onto my Mac, where I'll either store them as they are or put them into Final Cut Pro and make a little home video movie or something like that, but because of space. So I know that if you're the type of professional who is into video and to a certain degree audio, space is important. For me right now, mostly documents. Videos sometimes are an issue in trial. Sometimes you'll have like a surveillance video or something like that. But it's not a huge thing. And so since it is mostly documents, for me, 512 was still enough. But again, I laugh at that because years ago it was 256 and it was 64. That there's no question that we need more space over time. I think back to the days, the early days when I was using little PDA organizers and they had like 64K seemed like so much. But
the original iPad, it was 64 gigabytes at the top end as the upgrade from 8, 32, and 64, I think. And now the Apple Watch standard is 64 gigabytes of storage on that little chip. So things change over time, the other storage thing that could bite people is if they want to try to play like Death Stranding and some of the console games on their iPad. That's like a good 100 gigabytes for a lot of that stuff, but most people aren't doing that. But if you want to play around with that stuff eats a lot of space for sure. As far as accessories for the iPad, outside the standard, Magic Keyboard, anything out of the ordinary?
Well, it's funny that you say the standard Magic Keyboard because I actually don't have a Magic Keyboard, even though I know people love it. I know that everyone tells me, "Oh, I love my Magic Keyboard. It's so nice," and that's fantastic. And I definitely use a keyboard with my iPad quite a bit. But for me, I have, the Magic Keyboard obviously becomes a part of your case, which means that you're carrying with it all the time and lets you take it on and off a lot. And I don't need a keyboard all the time. I use it sometimes, but not all the time. So for me, the way that I have it is in my office setup. I'm talking to you right now from my office where I have to use a Windows computer because I'm a lawyer and we use Windows, even though Windows is boring, blah, blah, blah. Wish we could have Macs. In fact, when I started, just as a side note, when I started my law practice in 1994, the firm that I work for, called Adams and Reese, was one of the very few large law firms in the country that used Apple products. We used Macs. And I had a Mac on my desk for years and years into the early 2000s. And then it just got to the point where law office software was all written for Windows. And so using a Mac was really putting you at a disadvantage. Now it's nowadays, because so much is on the cloud, it's not as big of a deal. But so our firm switched over in the early 2000s to Windows, and everybody had a Windows computer, and so for many years I wasn't using really a lot of Apple technology at all for work. And then when the iPhone came out in 2007 and the iPad in 2010, that changed, and now once again Apple technology is a huge part of my life. But anyway, so when I'm at work, I have my boring Dell Windows computer that I use to get work done, but I have this Logitech keyboard connected to it just wirelessly, and these Logitech keyboards, like some other brands too, are so nice because you can have multiple Bluetooth connections. So just by pressing a button, I can switch between this keyboard working with my computer, or right next to my computer, I have my iPad, and I can press one button and suddenly the keyboard works with my iPad, and I could be typing something into notes or into a document or whatever it is, and then press the button and go bed. So for me, it's more useful to have the same keyboard work with multiple devices. So that's my office. And then when I'm at home, or when I'm traveling, I have one of the standard original Apple, they called it the Magic Keyboard. It's the keyboard that used to come with, come for free when you bought an iMac. And I just have these little keyboards, and I have a little case that's made by a company, I'm forgetting.
Waterfield Design?
It's not the Waterfield. It's the it folds up, and it has a little case, and it buttons up, and then you unfold it. It's
the origami thing.
And exactly.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Make it a stand, right? And that works great for me. That it's like a little stand, and so when I'm traveling, like on a if I have to get on a plane and travel across the countries for a deposition or just for pleasure or whatever, I will take that portable keyboard with me, or if I'm working downstairs at my kitchen table or something, I will use that portable keyboard with it, but then I'll put it away and I'm done with it. So that's why, as wonderful as the Magic Keyboard is, and I love that it's got the integrated trackpad, I just don't have a place for it in my life. So the accessories that I do use, the number one, of course, is the Apple Pencil. I love my Apple Pencil, use it, all the time. One of the reasons I wanted to upgrade to the M4 was to take advantage of the Pencil Pro, just because I know the pencil is so important to my life. I wanted to have the latest and greatest thing. Now, I'll tell you, parenthetically, although I'm very happy with the Pencil Pro, the number one feature that I actually have appreciated has simply been the fact that it has haptic feedback, which is sort of nice, just that it makes, you can feel it in your hand, or you feel like you're feeling it because of the haptic. That's actually nice. Some of the other features of the Apple Pencil, I haven't really used as much, like the little pop-up with windows that'll come that you can change pens and stuff like that. I feel like I'm going to slowly start using that more and more, but I need the apps that I use to support it more. But I do very much like my Apple Pencil. Another thing that is useful for me, as silly as it is simply having a very long USB-C cord at my desk so that it can go all the way to the floor and plug in. And so right here, whenever my iPad is there, I can just plug it into power and keep it charged. And then the other thing I'll mention is, for me, in my office setup, as I mentioned, I'm working at my computer in front of me, and then just to my left, right next to it, is my iPad, almost as if it's a second screen type situation. And for many years, I was using the Apple Smart Folio, which would be a cover, but then, of course, you can fold that up into a triangle, and it becomes a stand for your iPad. And I really like that, and I used it for the last couple of years. And so then with the brand new iPad M4, I bought the new version of the Keyboard Folio, and it's been a bit of a disappointment to me, to tell you the truth. When it comes to protecting the cover, it does a fantastic job. So whenever at the end of the day, when I take my iPad home, I stick it in there, and that's all fine. But the new design, the way that it folds up, it has what Apple calls a feature, which is that it can slide into different positions. And it's supposed to be, I can imagine being in some boardroom where somebody says, wouldn't it be nice if instead of folding up into one position, it could fold up into a bunch of different positions so you could change the angle? Like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's make that. But the problem is that in practice, the angles that it uses don't hold. They're not very sturdy. And so if I have my iPad sitting in the newest version of that case of the Folio, and if I touch my screen a little too hard, and of course you're always touching your iPad screen, then the whole thing falls down. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I have actually gotten to the point over the last few weeks that I get to my office in the morning, I take my iPad out of the Smart Folio and I just put the folio to the side. And then the rest of the day, what I'm using is a product that I bought many, many years ago, made by a company called Thought Out, and it's called the Stable Simplex. And it is just this hunkin' piece of metal that your iPad sits on, and they make more complicated versions, and I've tried them. In fact, I have one in the corner over there that you can actually adjust the tilt and stuff like that. But for me, the best of all of them is the simplest and the least expensive version, just this $50 version. It is so strong that if an intruder tried to rush into my office and attack me, I could defend myself with this thing. It is super, super sturdy. But as a result, I just sit my iPad right there on the lip of it. It holds it incredibly, incredibly stable. So I can write on it. I can write with my pencil. I can tap buttons. And it's only one position, but it's a perfect position. It's a great position, and it's very sturdy. And so that's what I'm using every day. So, and then I guess the last accessory that I use with my iPad are just an accessory of dongles. I give a lot of presentations with my iPad in Keynote, and so of course I have to connect from USB-C to HDMI. I have the Apple one, I've got some third-party ones. Sometimes I will take pictures off of my digital SLR camera, and so I use the little SD card connector. So I have lots of dongles that I use, but I feel like I don't have as many iPad accessories as I do for my iPhone. I guess you could count AirPods Pro too. I guess I use those as well. But for me, those are the key accessories that I really use.
Very cool. Yeah, I love Thought Out. They've been at it for a long time. I remember 10 years ago, they were making great stands, and they had this little flexible coil thing that you could attach it to stuff, and great little company. And I have the Smart Folio, and I find I want to use it in one position, but kind of defaults to the more upright position more often. So I have to learn let me do it a little bit further back this way. I haven't had the issue of it falling over, but I'm not doing a lot of writing on it when it's at that place. Will it fall down if it's on the table, kind of elevated to in that way, or is it just when it's more upright?
No, only when I put pressure on it. If you're just watching a movie on it, it's fine. It's perfect. It's great.
Right.
It's only when you want to start to interact with your iPad. Plus, I also will admit that my iPad doesn't stay stable very long because I will have it sitting next to my desk. So, for example, I might be on my computer writing a Microsoft Word document, writing a brief. And then on my iPad, I'm looking at an exhibit, or I'm looking at my opponent's brief because I'm reading their argument as I'm responding to it in Microsoft Word on my computer. So I go back and forth. But then oftentimes I will pick up my iPad and lean back in my chair because I want to annotate it. This gets back to the pencil. The reason I love my pencil so much is that, first of all, when I'm reviewing documents, I am highlighting them, circling, annotating in the margins, drawing lines out, putting little words to me, flagging things. I just do that all the time so that when I later go back to, for example, my opponent's brief, I can say, oh yeah, I circled this argument. I want to make sure that I respond to that so that the judge realizes why that's wrong or something like that. So I'm constantly using it from an annotation standpoint, and PDF Expert is what I love to use for that. But then I also love using the stylus just for taking handwritten notes.
Yeah.
And I do that all the time. If I'm talking to people or if I'm working on my cases, I have a little digital notebook for each one of my cases. And so I'll take handwritten notes. And that way, if I want to go back and see some notes that I wrote 6 months ago, I can see them there. So for me, the stylus is an incredibly, incredibly important part of me using an iPad.
Out of curiosity, when's the last time you've encountered a VGA projector or monitor? Is that something you've ever had to hook up to your iPad in recent memory?
It's funny you say that because since I do a decent amount of presentations, often education classes to other lawyers and stuff, that's why I mentioned that I have those dongles with me at all time. And, sometimes you'll find yourself in a presentation spot that's got older technology, so you have to work down to what they have. It's a VGA. It was about a year ago that I was sort of cleaning out my bag. I have a Tom bin bag that I carry back and forth to work every day that's got all my dongles and stuff in it, and I carry my iPad in there too. And I was realizing, I was like, you know what? It's been about a year or two since everybody now has a TV with HDMI. for presentations that I don't think I need the VGAs anymore. And so I decided, you know what, I'm done with the VGAs. And I used to also carry around Lightning connectors. Just in case, not that I needed them anymore, but just in case I was like with another attorney, like they might need a Lightning to HDMI connector just to have something for them. And I was like, you know, I'm just going to carry my own stuff. So I'm pretty much now all USB-C on one side and all HDMI on the other side. But I do know what you're talking about. It takes a long time sometimes for the technology around you to catch up to what you yourself are using.
One thing I was amazed to discover when I was bringing some iPods back to life is there's a lot of different USB-C to 30-pin cables out there that do both data and charging, and I now have some braided ones. They're super nice to, you know, just charge up your old iPod or even like an iPhone 4S or whatever, and that exists now. You can have USB-C on one end of a 30-pin cable, which is just wild to me.
I would have never thought that. That's funny.
Yeah, so that's a thing, evidently. As far as the kind of desk setup, do you ever hook your iPad up to that external? Do you have an external monitor at your desk?
I do. I never use it at my work external monitor, which is just a sort of a boring Dell monitor. In fact, although I'm sure I could connect to it, I've never really had a need to do so.
Okay.
I've tried it at home. You know, my home computer setup for many, many years was an iMac with the bigger screen, which I think was 27 inches. And then, of course, Apple stopped making those a few years ago. And so I recently switched to just having a Mac Mini as my home computer, which meant that my monitor was the, if I have my name right, the Apple Studio something or other, whatever the Studio. And so that's a nice Apple monitor that I can connect to my iPad, and I've done it once just to try it. But the reality is I haven't really needed to do it that much. You know, the iPad work that I tend to do tends to be on the iPad. And although I can understand the idea of being an environment where you'd want to have more windows and stuff, at least for the iPad, I'm not usually for me, it's using an iPad in connection with a computer, whether it be the PC at work or the Mac at home. So I'm definitely a big fan of multi-screens, but it's usually different generations. There was a time in the past with my earlier models of the iPads in the early 2010s when I would have like the traditional iPad side, the more, 10-inch, 11-inch side, where I had some of the first models of the iPad minis, which were so cute, and I loved
they were great.
That tiny little form factor. So there were actual times where I would actually travel with both an iPad and an iPad mini. And so I would get in my hotel room and I had like my iPad would be the main screen and the mini would be next to it for like looking at emails or something like that. So that's sort of multi-pad. But then I wasn't using the mini enough to justify upgrading it over the years, and I haven't done that. What I am interested in, though, and I know this switches over to your other podcast, the Vision Pro podcast, but I own an Apple Vision Pro and I love it so much. I wish I could use it even more for the work that I do, but I would love to have a way to have multiple, like a bigger iPad screen in my Vision Pro environment and other screens. The same thing that Apple is just now supporting with Macs, right? So you can hook it up, as you know, but for your setup, you can hook up your Mac to the Vision Pro. And in fact, I thought it was going to be multiple screens. We just learned that it's going to be this fall is to have the big, wraparound screen, which is really cool. What I think would be cool is if we could do the same thing with an iPad. Goodness knows with the M4, it's got the processor oomph to do that, to run it. But currently, there are ways to, like using apps like Bezel, to take the iPad screen and to just show the screen in a Vision Pro environment, but you can't interact with it. It's not like you're touching the screen or tapping things on it.
Yeah, the current solution is Bezel, and then VisionOS 2 AirPlay mirroring. You'll be able to mirror your iPad through just an AirPlay session into the Vision Pro.
But that'll just be looking at the screen, right? Because, I can't interact with the screen, will I?
Well, if you're hooked up to a keyboard trackpad solution, like if you did have a Magic Keyboard with the trackpad and keyboard, the trackpad would show up, the keyboard input would work, audio is transferred over in the session, so that audio would go to the Vision Pro soundscape as well, which is kind of nice.
But what I would want to do, that's good, but what I would want to do is if I'm looking at that iPad in the Vision Pro and I see a button, like click here, I can't look at it with my eyes, my fingers, and click here.
Yeah, no.
I have to go back to the iPad that's down. That's where it runs the environment.
Yeah.
Whereas with the Mac, because your input devices are just the mouse and the keyboard and stuff, that's not really an issue, and so you can interact with the same way.
Yeah.
And I know that with you could sort of solve it with an external mouse and an external trackpad. It's just not a perfect solution. It's
not
almost there. So, but my point is to get to your question of connecting an iPad to an external monitor. The one environment in which I would love to have more options in that realm is the Vision Pro. And again, but the Vision Pro is so new. I mean, it's such a beta. It's basically a beta practice right now. Give it 5 years, and we'll see where we are 5 years from now. So for now, when I'm using my iPad, because I'm often using it in conjunction with a computer, I really don't personally find the need to connect it to a monitor.
That makes sense. Did you ever experiment with VNC or any of those apps to put Windows onto your iPad as a solution to? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I do that all the time. The one that, I guess there's 2 ways that I'm currently using it right now. One is I have an app called Log Me In, which allows me to connect to my iPad, opens up a window that can be full screen on my iPad, and that connects to my work Windows computer. My Windows computer at work is always turned on. So even if I'm home or if I'm traveling or whatever, I can always connect to it. And I find that useful because sometimes there's a lot of work that I do as a lawyer that can be done on an iPad just fine. Emails, documents, etc. But every once in a while, there will be something that, even complicated things like my document management system, there actually is an app for it on my iPad, so I can use it there. But sometimes there will be something that I just need to have a real, quote unquote, real computer to use, or maybe I'll need a Windows computers to use. It's not something that works with Apple technology. And so I will absolutely, open up Log Me In, and then my full screen just looks like it's running Windows, and I'll do what I need to do. It's not quite as fast as it would be for a native app, but it's pretty fast with connections. It's more than usable. A good example is, even though the Mail app on my iPad communicates great with our Microsoft Exchange server we use for my office, there are some things that you just have options within Outlook on Windows that you don't have in the Apple Mail app. And so there are some times if I'm dealing with emails, it's just more convenient for me. I'll just use Log Me In to connect to my work computer, sometimes using my finger, sometimes using an external trackpad or a mouse, and you just use the environment and stuff like that. And that works well. And then there's other ones too. Like for years, we used a product at my firm called Citrix that would allow you to connect to, instead of my particular PC, I would connect to sort of a generic virtual PC in our office environment, and I would do that. We recently switched at my own office from using the Citrix solution to one that Microsoft itself makes called Azure, but it's the same idea. I mean, you're loading a generic Windows environment that's logged into your user credentials, but it doesn't have, for example, I like Log Me In because in Log Me In, if I left a document on my desktop, on my work computer, I will see it on the desktop on my iPad when I use Log Me In. Whereas if I'm using the more virtual Windows Azure environment, it's just a generic version. It's not my particular, So, but it's nice to have both options, because when I'm portable and on the go, it means that all I need to have with me is my iPad. 90% of my work, maybe even 95%, just can be accomplished on the iPad. But for those rare things that I need a Windows computer or just a computer in general for, I always know that I could just load up that virtual screen, make the connection, do the work I need to do, and then turn it off and get back to my iPad. Works great.
Does your iPad have Cellular? Chance?
It doesn't.
Okay.
I have had those over the year. In fact, my very first iPad back in 2010 had Cellular built in. I have found that, number one, I pretty much always have Wi-Fi everywhere. And number two, for those rare times that I don't, I can just connect to my iPhone Cellular using a hotspot. Now, I will admit
that's gotten really good, I must say. There's even a notification in iPad OS if you're trying to connect. If you don't have internet and your iPhone's nearby, you'll get a little notification. Do you want to connect to it?
It's great.
Sure, yeah.
It's great. Now, I will admit that for the people that love it, I will often hear them evangelize, oh, you just open up your iPad and you're ready to go on the internet. And I get it. I really do, because I've used them before over the years, and it is nice. But to me, the incremental advantage of, typically Apple would charge about $150 or $180 more to have the built-in Cellular.
Yeah, it's like $200 on the Pros.
Plus you need to pay the monthly fee. I'm like, gosh, am I going to get that value out of it? Because I don't need it that often, because I often have Wi-Fi. But I mean, I will admit, there are times where for whatever reason I don't have Wi-Fi available, and I'll connect to my phone, and sometimes the phone being persnickety or something. I'm like, oh, if I just had built-in. But once or twice a year, not worth it. The money that I would spend towards
the $20 a month or whatever it is,
put that towards something else instead.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, as you said, Log Me In, it brought me back to a Star Wars quote. That's a name I've not heard in a long time. Because I remember Log Me In from like a decade ago, and that was like one of the most touted kind of services out there for this kind of thing. And I just, I didn't know it's great. They're still, doing good work on iPad and all that.
They've changed their business practices. Back in the day when you probably knew about them, they were more consumer focused.
Yeah.
And then they decided that the money was where the companies are. And so they no longer really focus at consumers. If you want to have, that type of technology for people, there are other products to go to. They now sell to companies. Now, fortunately for me, I work for a huge company.
Yes.
So, we can justify having logged me in for people like me at my firm that do use it.
This episode is sponsored by Agenda, which recently launched version 19. Agenda is the app I use to prepare for and plan for all of my podcast episodes across both iPad Pros and Vision Pros. The collaboration features built into Agenda have been transformative to how I work with my guests. Agenda is free to download and use with no obtrusive ads. To unlock the full power of Agenda, give Agenda Premium a shot. One thing that Agenda continues to do that I love is their approach to premium features and unlocks. If you ever decide to cancel your Agenda Premium subscription, you get to keep all of the premium features available to you when you were a subscriber, or you can opt for their lifetime unlock, which will unlock the full power of Agenda on all of your Apple devices with a single one-time purchase. Here are just some of the things Agenda has added to their premium version over the years. Markdown export, custom line spacing, creating and editing events and reminders in Agenda, pinning notes and making footnotes, creating subcategories, archiving projects, saving notes as templates, collaboration, multiple windows, creating private notes in projects, creating custom smart overviews. Those are just some of the awesome features you unlock by becoming an Agenda Premium user. Another really handy feature is the Recent Projects feature. If you tap the clock icon at the bottom of the sidebar, it will hide projects you haven't touched in a while. This is great for showing you all the projects you are actively working on without the need to archive those projects. There's also a special OLED black mode with the premium version to let Agenda truly shine on that new M4 iPad Pro. Part of what I love about Agenda are the notes themselves. The notes are not just plain text, but the app makes it easy to include things like drawings when I'm on the iPad using the Apple Pencil, document scan, images, and attachments. You can add tables with a super simple UI to add additional rows or columns. By hitting the plus icon in Agenda, all these options are presented to you, including a simple way to link that note to another Agenda note with the full interface to locate that note you are looking for. The notes are built with Markdown in mind, but let you forget about that and create something beautiful and readable. If you do want to get that note out of Agenda, you can hit Copy As to copy that note in rich text format, Markdown, HTML, plain text, summary, or an Agenda link that you can put in a different app like OmniFocus, allowing you to quickly get back to the note from a different app. There are also sharing options to share that note as a PDF, text bundle, or Agenda file. In Agenda 19, the search system was completely revamped. The thing that impresses me the most with this new search system is how it lets you take advantage of these searches. Beyond just basic searches, you can filter down your entire Agenda library as you bounce from project to project, or you can create a simple, smart overview that lives at the top of the sidebar. Both of these are super powerful and expand beyond what most apps do with their search. Another little thing about Agenda that I love is their header. At the very top of the window, you'll see the category name, followed by the project name in bold. If you are working on a note, that note will also be listed. What you can do is tap on the category name, and that will pull up a searchable version of the sidebar. Better yet is tapping on the project name. This will pull up a list of every single note in that project, along with the note status. You can also change how that list is grouped and sorted. This makes it super easy to jump to any note in your current project. Finally, if you want to get back to the note you are working on, for example, if you scroll to the top of the project to reference a note and want to get back to the active note, you can simply tap on the note title in the header, and Agenda will scroll you back down to the note you were working on. The UI of Agenda continues to delight me as I use it, and all these little touches add up to create one of my favorite designed apps I have on my iPad. To learn more, go to agenda.com. Download Agenda 19 today for free from the App Store. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com. So, how big is the practice you are at? Like, how many other people are working with you?
Yeah, so we're a pretty big firm. We have almost 300 attorneys and other legal professionals. So we are, it depends who you ask. There are some law firms which are like the mega law firms that's got a million attorneys and stuff like that. And we are not one of those top 50, firms in the country. But on the other hand, by many legal standards, we're a pretty big firm. We probably have 20 different offices located in maybe 11 states in the southeastern portion of Louisiana, of the United States. I'm in New Orleans, Louisiana, but our offices are from Texas all the way over to Florida, up to Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina. So, we will often service clients in that south central, southeastern portion of the United States, and then they'll have other counsel that they'll often use in the West Coast and, up in New York and stuff like that. But that's most of the clients that we service. And I love having, partners that I work with in other states. I'm also licensed in the state of Florida. Every once in a while I'll do some work over in Florida, but most of my work is in Louisiana. But as a result of working in a big firm, we have all different levels of technological savvy at my law firm, from people that barely know how to use an iPhone to people that are just as into the technology as I am, and all but wear the beanies with the propellers on top, which sometimes I feel like I virtually have.
Are there others incorporating the iPad into their work at your office?
Yeah, we have lots of iPad people. I'm certainly at the cutting edge of it. I've always been one of the most technology forward people that I know. So at my firm, I doubt anyone uses an iPad quite as much as I do, but a lot of people use it quite a bit. And, in the legal sphere, just to give you some statistics, and it's been a while since I've seen the latest data on this, but something around 80% of all attorneys in the United States have an iPhone. Maybe even a little bit higher than that, and the rest of them basically use Androids, so sort of like an 80-20 split.
Yeah.
About 45 to 50% of all attorneys in the United States use an iPad, and there really isn't an alternative to the iPad. Amazon makes tablets and some Android people, but they're not really used by many people. So if you think about it, so on a national basis, about roughly half of all attorneys have an iPad, and I would say that at my law firm, easily half have an iPad, maybe a little bit more than that. Now, some of them are just using it for the most simplest of purposes possible, and then other people are in my office every day asking these incredibly sophisticated questions about, I know that you can do this, tell me how to do that, and stuff like that. So we have all ranges.
That's really cool. I'd imagine OCR has got to be one of the technologies over the past decade that's really improved in a way that's probably changed your life. Because I remember back a decade ago, you'd send, Devin Think Pro Office, and you'd have it process your PDFs, and it'd take a while to do that. And now it feels like it's just like it's instant. Like everything's just OCR'd by default almost. Is that kind of a truism?
In fact, the document management system that we use at our firm, we made this decision years ago that just automatically, when documents get uploaded to it, they get OCR'd. Sometimes they already are OCR'd. In fact, some courts, like our federal court system, actually require that you upload documents that are in that sort of a format. What they really want you to have is a generated format. So, like, for example, you'll write a document in Microsoft Word and then generate the PDF so that it's fully Word searchable. They don't really like it when it's like just an image of the document that you have to OCR. But they do have requirements on that. Sometimes in state courts it can be a little more loosey-goosey. But yeah, it's key for us to have documents OCR'd, and then that makes it so useful for me, because when I have that done, when I'm working with documents on my iPad in PDF Expert, I will often be looking at a brief, a contract, an exhibit, whatever it is, and I will be highlighting the sentences, which of course the way to do that most effectively is if you have it OCR'd. If it's not OCR'd, then you can apply what's essentially yellow paint on top of it as if you were highlighting it, but then it makes it more opaque and it's harder to read and it's not ideal. So what you really, really want is things OCR'd. And every once in a while, Tim, I will have a document that somehow gets to my iPad and it's not an OCR format. I'm like, oh, let me stop. And although there are tools on the iPad which will OCR, and I've used them, I actually usually get the best results, and it's usually convenient enough for me that I'll just jump over to my computer. Usually it's my PC, and I'll just use our PC software to, do a quick OCR of this, and now let me use that version of the document.
I see. Yeah. The document management system you use at the office, that is a Windows first approach with also an iOS component. Is that right?
Yeah, it's called iManage. There's a couple of platforms that are used by attorneys, but iManage is, I don't know if they're the number one, but they're certainly one of the top ones. I mean, if you look at the top 5 document management systems, they're not just law firms, companies and accounting firms and others use them, but they do have a big law firm concentration. And so, yeah, I mean, they are, originally it used to be they would encourage you to have a server at your own law firm that kept all your documents and stuff. But in today's world, where we're moving towards things being more in the cloud, everything, whether it's email or whatever it is all moving towards cloud technology, and that's how the latest versions of iManage is as well. And so, I'm syncing with the cloud on my computer, and I'm accessing iManage on my Windows computer, but because it's cloud-based, I could, in theory, use a web browser, Safari on my iPad, to access it, and that works. Or they actually have an app you can just download from the App Store to interface with iManage. And the features it's not 100% the same as the Windows environment, but it's close enough to get stuff done and to get things, because of sort of the inherent sandboxing restrictions and stuff like that on the iPad. Sometimes that can be a hindrance to getting some work stuff done, but you work around it, and there are ways to make it work. So I'm now in a situation where even if I'm out of the office, if I need to get a document, I can get the document, and I can annotate it, and I can, send it to somebody else and say, here, I've circled the things you need to look at, take a look at this, do this research project, whatever it is, I'm passing things along, and it all works out.
And it all stays within iManage, or do you offload documents from that to a different, more iPad first app to do the highlights and the markup and stuff?
Yeah, so that's what I personally prefer to do. I mentioned earlier that, there's a million PDF apps for the iPad, and I've used many of them. I've probably used all of them over the years. But the one for many years that I've really found the most useful for me personally is made by a company called Readdle, Readdle, and theirs is called PDF Expert, and it just works great. So the PDF Expert is good because one part of the app has sort of interfaces that you can connect to file servers, OneDrive or Dropbox if you've got stuff there, wherever they are, so you can sort of get things in and out of it. And then, of course, in the app itself, once you open up documents, you can then, it's got every annotation tool that you could possibly imagine. If you pay for the pro version, you can even create your own menu so that the pens that you like and the highlighters that you like are right there on a toolbar at the top. For me, it's totally worth it. So, I know that I like to have a red, blue, green, these are the pens I like, these are the pen widths that I like, these are the highlighters that I like. Everything is right there in front of me to touch, and I can go and I can annotate and highlight and circle and whatever I want. So I will usually do it in that environment, and then I will typically, there are ways to upload directly to iManage from my iPad, and I do them sometimes in a pinch. Sometimes I'll end up sort of sending the document back to myself through some other way and getting it back into the system, or oftentimes I really don't need it in our system because, for me, often our document management system will be that's like the file cabinet. That's the official version of the document. And then I'll have my work version of the document that just has my notes on it that I'll sort of keep locally or whatever, just so I can see what I wrote on it. But that doesn't really need to live. Sometimes it does, but most of the time that doesn't need to live in the quote-unquote file cabinet of the DMS.
Are you able to interface directly with iManage within PDF Expert? Is that a thing? Is there server access where you can log in that way?
They don't currently have that. That would be useful if it was available, and I would welcome it, but I don't think that we currently have that.
Okay. So a lifetime ago, before the iPad was a thing, what, were you dealing with paper? What was your technology stack prior to incorporating the iPad, and has the iPad replaced, literal paper for you? In the old days, did you print out paper and highlight and have these boxes of paper you'd bring around? Or
so you see me smiling a little bit because I'm gonna tell you a little story. I write about stuff like this on iPhone JD all the time. Although the website is for attorneys, really, you don't have to be an attorney to enjoy the website, but sometimes I have these posts that are really written for attorneys. And as an attorney, it's such a typical thing for an attorney to have a legal pad in their hand. We all see them, those yellow sheets of paper with the lines on them and stuff like that, usually legal size, sometimes letter size. And, it's such a, it's as much of the lawyer costume as a coat and tie or something like that, or a nice outfit. And so I did a little research, and I found out that the original legal pad was invented in 1888 when a guy named Thomas Halley worked at a paper mill, and he had the idea of taking the discarded paper scraps from the mill and sort of putting them together into inexpensive pads, and he would sell these pads. And in the early 1800s, apparently there was a judge in Massachusetts that approached Mr. Hawley and said, hey, could you take these pads, and I want you to put lines on them and have a red line that's sort of like an inch and a quarter from the left side so that I could scribble notes on the side, and if you could give me these, this would be great for me as a judge. And he's like, sure, Judge, I'll do that. And then that was the first legal pad. And so since then, since the early 1900s, for a good 100 years and going, lawyers especially have been using these legal pads to take notes when you're in interviews or take notes when you're at trial and stick some of your documents in it and stuff like that. And so the legal, when I started practice in the 90s, I was using legal pads all the time for all of my cases, keeping all of my notes. Sometimes I would write things, of course, digitally on the computer, but oftentimes the legal pad is what I had with me. And it won't surprise you that it got sort of, unwieldy, because you'd have your notes and they're like, well, what do I do with them? So I'd stick them in a manila folder, and then my secretary would store them. And then 6 months later, who knows where those notes are? I'd have to go find them again and pull them up and everything else. And so I knew, as we had this transition into digital documents and OCRing, like you were talking about in the early 2000s, I'm like, there's got to be a better way. And so sure enough, when the iPad came around in 2010, I had been doing things over the years before then. I had been using my iPhone, before that, my Palm devices, ever since the early 2000s, of scanning things and using Document to Go or these software solutions that would have, but it was never really perfect. The iPad was the first time that it sort of brought together that everything I thought that I needed as an attorney, because instead of having that legal pad that I would take notes on, I would take notes right there on the iPad. Originally, it was all third-party styluses, because this was before the days of the Apple stylus, and I used to use them with all sorts of apps, and then eventually Apple came out with the pencil, and apps came around. So all of my notes I would just take digitally, and that was so transformative, because then I would have them with me forever. There was unlimited space. I didn't have to worry about finding something I stuck in a file cabinet. I could search them. So if I have a digital notebook of a case that I'm working on, like the Jones versus Smith case, and I'm like, gosh, I know that 8 months ago I wrote something about something, I can instantly find it from searches. It just completely changed my practice. And that's just from the handwriting standpoint of notes. Also the documents, the PDF documents, the Word documents, everything else. So, the iPad, I love my iPhone, don't get me wrong. I name my website iPhone JD. It's key. But the iPad, from just a productivity standpoint, has been, it is the modern version of everything that I think that Massachusetts judge back in the early 1900s was looking for. He wanted to have something easy to carry around that just had his stuff in there, and that's what the iPad is for me. And I love it. And so whenever I talk to other attorneys, whether they are, they have an iPad but they don't use it a lot, or they're just iPad curious or whatever, I try to convey that, it's just putting everything right there in your hands. And again, it's not, some people say, oh, is it going to replace your computer? No, you're still, when you want to write the next Microsoft Word document, you're going to, yes, there's Microsoft Word on an iPad. It works great. But, and I do use it sometimes, don't get me wrong, but a lot of that sort of stuff I'm going to do in the computer. But for me, it's it's the little buddy to the computer. It's the accessory to the computer. It's the thing that you use right next to the computer that just works so well.
Yeah. Have you looked into, does there a universal control exist for Windows, some kind of third-party app that's trying to hack that together?
That's funny. I do love universal control on my Mac at home. It's so useful that I'm using my keyboard with my Mac, and again, that's why I don't need to have the magic keyboard for the iPad, because if I'm in front of my Mac, my cursor just moves right on over, or my keyboard just moves right on over. I have not actually looked to see if that exists, and being at a law firm, because of security requirements, our computers are so locked down. It's not like I can, anytime I want to install something, even as the person at my firm that's the chair of our technology committee, even I need to get the IT department to come in and approve things on there. And so putting in hacky software that, maybe I have not explored it. It may or may not exist. But, and again, I don't necessarily know that I would use it. For me, having the keyboard and pressing one button and having my Logitech keyboard go back and forth is good enough. And although I suppose with the universal access that you're describing, my mouse could also work on the iPad, but I don't need that. I don't need
Okay. Does that Logitech keyboard, is it paired with your Vision Pro as well as a third button?
I don't bring my Vision Pro into the office enough to do that.
Okay.
Having said that, it's funny you say that. I actually do. I think the answer technically is yes, because when I was first bringing it in here, I actually think I did pair it with it. But nowadays, I keep my Vision Pro at home. I was just talking 2 seconds ago about having things locked down. One of the things, and I know the Vision Pro is in early days, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
But one of the things I'm looking forward to is in order for, at my firm, and I think most companies that have security requirements, especially as lawyers, to have a mobile device connect to the firm device, you're going to have security measures in place, right? So we use mobile device management software. The reason that I can use my iPhone and my iPad so seamlessly with my work environment is that we have the MDM software, which allows me to securely run email and things like that, and to securely run other apps. The Vision Pro, when it first came out earlier this year, did not support mobile device management. And then after a couple of months, Apple turned on that support. And I think that there's currently maybe only one company that's currently offering it. I had a post on my website about a month or two ago that Microsoft announced that OneNote was available for the Vision Pro, which is great, but it only worked for your personal OneNote stuff, because your company OneNote stuff, you're going to have that MDM connection, which the Microsoft project is called Microsoft Authenticator, I think it is. And so Microsoft had sort of a big disclaimer at the bottom of that post announcing this new software, saying, we know Authenticator doesn't exist yet. We're working on Authenticator for the Vision Pro. We'll, come back here in the future for updates of when it's available. So my sincere hope is that at some point this calendar year, Microsoft's Authenticator, which is the one that we use at my law firm, will turn on their MDM support for Vision Pro. Again, they already have MDM support for the iPhone and iPad. I'm not a developer, but is the Vision Pro that different? I'm sure, whatever skills that they have that they've talked to for an iPad, I suspect it's very similar to what they need to do to talk to Vision Pro. So eventually that will be turned on. And when that does happen, I think that's going to substantially change what I do with the Vision Pro, because I will be able to have my mail and my contacts and my, everything else will be able to communicate with that. And that will be my calendar. That will be wonderful when it happens, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, MDM I've always had mixed feelings about, because it's like, it seems like your company has full access to your device and can wipe it and all that, right?
Yeah. There were people, some people were always nervous about that, especially in the early days. Like, oh, does that mean my company can read my emails? Or, well, actually, yes, they can read your emails because the company owns the email. We don't do it as a practice, but for good reason we could. But can the company?
But your personal email is probably on that device as well, right?
Well, sure. So if I like my Gmail accounts or my iPhone JD account or something like that, and my company does not have access to that, they only have access to my firm account. And likewise for my photos and stuff, MDM software, I guess in theory you could write it otherwise, but all MDM software that I know of does not access your personal stuff.
Okay.
Your personal photos and stuff like that. But there's a reason for it, because, back in the early days, if you go back in time, in the early 2000s, when we first had the idea of mobile technology that would work with firms like BlackBerries and other competing devices like Good Technologies, G100 and stuff like that, it would be your separate device. And you would sometimes see people that would have almost what appeared to be like their bat belt. They would have their cell phone, they would have their PDA, they would have their BlackBerry. It's like, how many different devices do you want to have? And of course, no one wants to carry all those different devices. And so what we really want to have is a single device that has everything. So then the question becomes, is it better for the firm, your company, to pay for and own your iPhone, or do you want to have your own iPhone that you purchase yourself? And of course, you want to choose your own features. And so, I think where we are now is the perfect compromise, that when you work for a company, law firm or otherwise, with MDM, your iPhone and your iPad, there are parts of it that are private to you, your pictures, your apps and stuff like that. But then there are some installed apps that the firm owns. And so if I was to, call up my managing partner and say, I quit today, I'm leaving here tomorrow, they would remove Microsoft Word from my iPad, because it's the company that pays for that. They would remove my access to the company email, but I would still have all my personal email. And I think that that's a perfectly fair compromise that allows you to, BYOD, bring your own device. And again, there's going to always be some people that worry about privacy implications. I will admit, for example, most MDM software has a switch that you can turn on and off that says, that your iPhone and other devices know where you are at all times, right? Find My technology. If you lose your iPhone, you can find it. In theory, could a company see, where Jeff Richardson is located in the world? If the MDM set up correctly, it probably could. We don't have that turned on at my firm, but some other company might be, we want to know where you are all the time. And if that's uncomfortable with you, then I guess you're going to have two iPhones and leave one at work all day and have your personal iPhone and go back to the bat belt where you have your multiple devices. But those are just the trade-offs that we have to live with, in a modern society.
Does your work pay for a phone plan? Like, do you use dual SIM and have a personal line and a work line? Is it a thing for you, or?
I just have one line. We have, every company's got their own policy. My company does happen to reimburse for a portion of the data plan. Okay. And that's really for historical reasons, because back in the day they used to pay for, the BlackBerry and stuff like that. So that's just a nice little perk that we have. But I'm sure every company's got their own policy on that.
Okay. Yeah. When Apple Silicon came out for Macs, I'd imagine that just became impossible at that point to to try to emulate any of the Windows software that your firm uses. And it sounded like even prior to that, in the Intel days, you weren't really using Rosetta or any tools to try to use a Mac alongside the Windows stuff, right?
That actually was not an issue for us because my law firm, like I said, was using Macs in the 90s and then became a dual environment in the early 2000s. And I want to say by 2002, maybe, if I had to guess, we were all 100% PCs and have been since. And the only time that, so at that point it was all Office, just Intel computers, and so it doesn't really matter what the Mac stuff is. There would be no reason to emulate anything for working with Office stuff. And then likewise, for my iPad, for example, there's never really been a need for me to emulate Windows on my iPad. Not that there's even been an ability to do that until literally just this week.
Yes.
I think the first Windows XP emulator on the iPad. But that's never really been a thing. Now, the virtual networking connection, the VNC software that you were talking about, LogMeIn, Citrix, Microsoft, those sorts of technologies is really where you're doing it. So you're not emulating Windows. You're just remotely connecting to Windows. So for that reason, the Apple Silicon transition from an emulation standpoint has been, that has had no impact at all on my practice. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Apple Silicon because it means that their products have gotten so fast and so nice to use, and there's a million things I love about it, but it has not had any negative impacts on my practice for sure.
Gotcha. So you started adopting the iPad kind of right away when it came out in 2010. The OS and hardware has been improving, I'd say, greatly over this past decade plus. We can do a lot more on it today than we could back then. What have been some of your favorite kind of additions to the OS and hardware over the years that you are now able to do that you weren't, when the iPad came out in 2010?
From a hardware standpoint, that transition to the larger iPad that I mentioned in 2015, I already talked about how big that was, because being able to have a larger screen and see more, whether it's just because I'm looking at an exhibit or a document, or if I'm doing something like using LogMeIn and you want to have as big a screen as possible because the Windows stuff, of course, is going to be a much larger screen, so you don't want things to be too small. That transition was incredibly helpful for me. And, sort of fast forward to today, when this year, when Apple announced its latest iPads, we now live in a world where you can get a big iPad that doesn't have an iPad Pro, right? You can get the iPad Air in the larger size, and that's a new change that Apple's had in 2024, and it's one that makes me think, because for so many years now, 9 years, I used to tell attorneys, the reason that you might want to get an iPad Pro is because you might really enjoy that larger screen like I have. For the first time ever this year, you can get the larger screen without getting a Pro. And as a result, if I'm trying to recommend to an attorney which iPad do you want to get, maybe you don't need the Pro. The Pro might just be for, it's got the nicer screen, it's got the Stylus Pro, it's got the nice things. I think we're now living in a world where the iPad Pro is just more of the premium, nicer product. If you're going to use it a lot, you want something nicer, it's what to get. But in terms of a functionality point, you get the same way. So that big screen was a big change in 2015, and it's even more interesting in this year, 2024, because of the decision that Apple made. Other than that, though, as I think anyone that tries to get work done, whether you're an attorney or whether you're an accountant or whether you're a business or whatever, things like the multi-window and multitasking, that's really been one of the biggest changes that I found really useful.
Are you a split screen user or a Stage Manager person?
I'm currently using Stage Manager.
Okay.
But there are times when I might switch it back to split screen. For now, I think Stage Manager works pretty well for me to have overlapping, because that's just the way I'm used to doing things on Windows or on the Mac, for that matter. That you have the overlapping windows and you switch between them. But that idea of switching back and forth, it's really helpful when you're getting stuff done, and I'm working on this document and I'm getting stuff from email and I'm doing this thing on the internet and everything else. It's also even sort of a requirement. If I talk about LogMeIn specifically, the LogMeIn app, for security reasons, is very locked down. And if I'm using that app and I just exit the app to go into mail, it will disconnect from my network and then I gotta log back in, which is a pain. However, if I use Stage Manager, it's almost like you're tricking it, because I'm putting it in the background, and technically my email app is in the foreground and I'm using my email, but LogMeIn does not know that it does not have my foreground attention, and so it stays connected. So that's like my little trick is that if you use LogMeIn, and I don't know if there's other VNC apps that work the same way, you can trick them into thinking that they still have your full attention by using the stage manager mode, and it allows you to do some multitasking and move back and forth.
Yeah, that's how you export video if you want to do something else in the iPad as well. You just
there you
Stage
go.
Manager.
Similar idea. Yeah, so it's a good way to do it. So those are some of the bigger things that I've seen over the years. The multitasking, the multi-windowing support has been really useful for me for getting work done, and the larger screen.
And of course, Apple Pencil is a whole new thing.
Oh, I tell you, for years, if you go on my iPhone JD website, there's like an index of my old posts, and I have a whole section in there called Styluses, where I must have reviewed, I don't even know, 100 styluses over the year. Because from 2010, when the iPad came out, until when the Apple Pencil first came out, there were all of these third-party styluses. And, some of them were useful. Some of them had tricks. I mean, some of them had like a little silly one I have in front of me here that looks like a number 2 pencil, but it's got a stylus.
Yeah.
Everything, there were a million styluses.
There was that clear plastic disc with the little red dot in the middle. I love that one.
That was actually one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
Because the name of which is slipping it, but it was my favorite stylus at the time. It's the one that I used to use. I actually have it here in front of me in my little pencil tab.
Oh, no way.
And so I used to use those styluses all the time. It was the Jot Pro, of course.
Yes.
So nobody on the audio can lift this, but Tim is looking at my little disc.
Oh wow, that was a trip.
And so I used those all the time, and I loved them. But then once Apple came out with the Apple Pencil, show's over. I mean, none of the third-party stuff. Adonit still makes styluses, and they're still good, and I've looked at them over the years. And in fact, I will even say that they are good enough that you can actually use them, and they're just fine. But there's just always something about the Apple Pencil that's just going to be just a little bit better. I love the fact that it attaches magnetically to the top of the screen, so it's always charged and it's always synced and everything else. It was really the game changer. So for most intents and purposes, with some very rare exceptions, I really stopped reviewing third-party styluses because I would just tell attorneys, just get the Apple Pencil.
Yeah.
And I guess now you have a choice depending upon which model of iPad you get, of whether you get the regular Pencil or the Pencil Pro. But yeah, I mean, the Apple Pencil Pro just sort of changed everything.
It's kind of wild to think the Apple Pencil came out along with the iPad Pro 5 years after the original iPad. That's it. It seems like it was so much longer, but really, original iPad, then 5 years later we have iPad Pro and Apple Pencil. And it feels like it hasn't been that long. And we've had 9 years of iPad Pro and Apple Pencil, and we've had more time with the iPad Pro than we haven't without it. Yeah. It's kind of wild.
It's interesting to me as somebody who listens to podcasts, and I guess anyone listening to this is by definition someone who listens to podcasts. I will hear other people that are very much big iPad users, like Jason Snell or Federico Vitici, and they will talk. I mean, they love their iPads, and you'll have people ask them about the Pencil, and they're like, "Oh, I really never use the Pencil." Jason was talking the other day. My handwriting's too horrible, and Federico doesn't use it. And I am just as big as an iPad user as they are, and yet maybe it's just because of me or the nature of the work that I do, but. I mean, the Pencil, oh my goodness. I mean, if I had my iPad and I left my Pencil at home, I might get in the car and drive back home and go get that Pencil and come back to work, because it's just such an integral part of what I do with it all the time. Whether I'm annotating or whether I'm taking notes, or even, I mean, I've gotten so used to it, even if I'm just scrolling through something, sometimes I'll just use the Pencil just to scroll through and stuff like that. I really, really love my Pencil. And I know that the graphic artists, of course, use it in their own completely separate way from me. They talk about different pencil tips. For me, everything's just a pen tip. I don't need all the fancy tips. So like that new barrel roll feature that you have with the Pencil Pro that you can change, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not doing calligraphy as I'm taking notes.
I mean, that could be a new niche you get into. You have the pretty notes that no one else has.
Yeah. The one thing for the stylus that I'll say is that the one shortcoming is I cannot write quite as fast as I can with pen on paper. And where it matters is, as a lawyer, sometimes I might be in court or might be in a deposition, and I'm trying to write down what the other person says, and I really want to get it as much down as possible. I can, if I'm I'm doing an oral argument.
And you're not allowed to record audio? Is that a rule?
You're not allowed to record it, but for me, like if I'm doing an oral argument on appeal, my opponent is speaking, and as soon as they finish, I instantly need to stand up and give my response, right? So I need to jot down my notes of what they're saying on the left side, and on the right side, I'm going to put what I want to say in response to it. I can write faster with ink on paper than I can with a stylus on my screen.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the very, very few parts of my life that I still use the paper for. And then when my hearing's over, Tim, I will often come back to my office, scan those pages, and just put them in my notebook and GoodNotes so that I just have them if I ever wanted to look at my notes again in the future.
Okay.
But that's one of the few times that I use it. Actually, the other time is sometimes I will use paper and pen because my iPad is showing documents or exhibits or something on it, and I don't want to be both. I want to both have a place to take notes and a place to look at them.
You know, that just sounds like you need a second iPad. I mean,
a second iPad, exactly. Got to bring that iPad Mini out of retirement and start taking notes there. But with those exceptions, yeah, I'm using the stylus all the time with the iPad.
I'd imagine ballpoint is the fastest pen to write with versus like something else.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah,
you know, smearing it with like fountain pen ink or whatever, right?
Yeah, if you want to get really technical about it, my pen of choice is called the Zebra Sarasa, Sarasa clip, which you can buy on Amazon for very cheaply. And I have all the pens I've used in the years. I don't know what this is. It's like an ink. It's not a ballpoint. It's like an ink. I don't know what it is, but
rollerball.
Rollerball, exactly. Rollerball, and it can write it's very dark. It's very easy to read, and you can write very quickly with it. That is my.
The thing that I'm not sure if they'll ever crack is like glass is slippery, and you know you're able with paper and pen. Like there is something about the tactile nature of that and it catching on the paper a little bit. And I don't know, like I was hopeful with the haptics, maybe another generation of haptics improvements. You can have haptics that would add resistance in some way to help with that.
So,
but I don't know. As far as scanning, you just use the flatbed scanner in your office, or do you have a document scanner you work with?
At my personal office, the photocopy machines that we use also scan as well. So just as if you're going to make a photocopy, you put your document in or put it in the document feeder, and I just press the buttons on the photocopier and it sends it to my email address, and so I can do it that way. Pretty simple. I will tell you though, in a pinch, I will often use my iPhone and a scanning app just to scan that way too, and that works pretty well as well.
Okay.
The quality is not 100% as good. Like if I'm going to attach something to a court filing, of course I'm going to use a professional scanner. But if I'm just scanning something for me personally, like a receipt or something like that, just that I just want to have, I find that my iPhone scanner is more than good enough.
Have you tested the M4 iPad Pro scanning? Did the feature touting of getting rid of your reflection in it, is that actually a thing?
I've tested it. But the reason that it doesn't really work with my workflow is it really only works in like the Notes app and stuff like that. Versus,
interesting.
What I would hope, like,
because you can ask Siri to scan a document and it'll open up the Files app and start scanning.
And I could do that too, but I really haven't had a lot of tests with it. Most of the time, I'm using an app called Scanner Pro, which I think is also a Reader app.
It is,
on my iPhone to do my scans. But I understand the need because there are some times that, because of the light, it'll be casting a shadow on it. And in fact, sometimes on my phone, what I'll do is I'll change my phone from the 1x mode to the 2x mode, and I'll move my phone further away, and that takes away the shadow. So no, when I heard that feature was announced for the iPad, I thought I'd be really into it. It just hasn't yet been something. I mean, maybe that'll change.
Yeah.
As of today that we're recording this, it's not yet something that I'm using.
Yeah, I need to try that out because I have not had a need to scan quite yet. Are there any other tasks, like as a lawyer, that you do that we haven't dove into that you do on the iPad?
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about apps like PDF Expert and GoodNotes, which I use for all of my handwritten notes. But there are some law-specific apps that are incredibly useful. And I suspect that if anyone is listening to this podcast who is a lawyer, they already know about Lit Software, which is a company that's been around since 2010 when the first iPad was announced. And they have created lawyer-specific, litigation-specific apps for lawyers that are simply fabulous. The thing that they're probably best known for is an app called TrialPad, which allows you as an attorney to walk around the courtroom with your iPad in your hand, and you can wirelessly be connected to a screen, and you can like have a document come up on the screen, and you can have a part of the document, become bigger and circled and highlighted. And so it's a great way to show things off to a jury or to a classroom or something like that. So that's a fantastic app. because I'm not a trial attorney, I don't have as much use for that app as other people. They have another app called Transcript Pad, which, and again, this is very geeky, but when you're a lawyer and you attend a deposition and the court reporter writes down everybody's words and then you get those words in sort of like a question answer format, Transcript Pad allows you to suck those things in. It knows all about transcripts. It organizes them perfectly, and it gives you these tools for, as you're reading through the transcript, this question and answer has to do with the issue of how much money my opponent's seeking. And this question and answer has to do with the issue of, was the light at the intersection red or green? And so you can go through and you can code things. And then later on, using this app, I might have a dozen depositions in a case. I can say, just show me the things that I coded on the issue of, was the light red or green? And it presents them all right there for you. And it's so easy to then, pull things together. So that's a fabulous app. And again, it's an app that only a lawyer would use, but they're fantastic. And so they have some other apps too. So so that's one that that's very lawyer specific that I love. And then there are other apps that are very important to my law practice, but other people know about them. 1Password, for example.
Yes.
I love 1Password, use it extensively. People on your show have talked about it in the past. I won't repeat them, but 1Password's amazing. I love it. Keynote, because I give so many presentations, I really like Keynote. And even though most of the legal world is based on PCs and people use PowerPoint, and they do have PowerPoint for the iPad, blah, 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 I find that when I'm creating presentations, there's just something about the philosophy of Keynote, the way it works, that it just works, it just clicks better for me. And I particularly like using Keynote on an iPad because I like being physical with it. I can use my stylus and I can use my hands and I can move things around. I would prefer to create a presentation using Keynote on my iPad than using Keynote on my Mac. Now, sometimes after I go through the trouble of creating my presentation, for one reason or the other, I will need to turn it in a PowerPoint format, and I can export to PowerPoint if I need, and open it up real quick in PowerPoint, make sure that everything exported okay. But 90%, 95% of presentations that I do start, middle, and end in Keynote, and then some small portions of them have to get transferred into PowerPoint for whatever reason at the very end. But I really love Keynote. That's a big app for my practice.
When I was in school, it was very demoralizing when I had to export to PowerPoint and strip out some of the beautiful stuff that Keynote could do.
Exactly, especially those initial transitions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Other than those, though, we've been talking about business stuff, but of course I love my iPad and all my Apple devices for personal things. I'm a huge photo person. I love having photos. I've got 60,000 photos and videos and all that stuff that I love to do just, as an amateur. And sometimes when you listen to podcasts like this, that people that are so much into the video sphere will talk about all these incredible things that they do. And I'm just, wow, it just makes my head spin. I love dabbling in some of that stuff like Final Cut Pro, which is actually, you can down do on the iPad and stuff too. But again, that's not my law practice. That's just
Yeah, I did my first Final Cut Pro project the other day, and I was impressed with it. It took me a bit to get my head around what they want me to do with this app because it's really designed around you holding the jog wheel and then, hitting these things on the menu bar versus I'm used to other apps having let me tap the screen with two fingers to play and pause, and there's no special taps or anything in Final Cut. It's use the jog wheel and then these other little things on the other side of the screen. It's a different way of working, but it's a little different, but not bad.
But considering how powerful the app is, the fact that and again, it should exist on the iPad. It's an M4 for goodness sakes. Of course you should be able to have, or even an M1 or whatever it is that you're using. We should have this professional type software on the iPad. So I was thrilled when Apple announced that it was coming to the iPad, and I have definitely used it.
Are there any other apps you depend on in your day job that we haven't covered yet?
No, nothing that would be worth talking about. Of course, I use everything from the built-in Notes app to, Mastodon to a million other apps.
Yes.
But nothing that's really, it's timekeeping apps that I use as an attorney, but the ones that we've talked about were really the big ones.
Yeah, because you probably bill clients per whatever hour and whatnot.
I do. And so we have, different apps that I can keep track of that on my iPad or on my computer, and it's all cross-platform and, cloud-based and et cetera, et cetera. Definitely the worst part of being a lawyer is having, and I guess other professionals bill their time by the minute too, but I want to just get my work done, and then I got to sit there and think, okay, did I spend 0.4 of an hour on this? Did I spend 0.6 of an hour? It's never a fun part of it, but I guess it's how the bills get paid, so you got to pay for your shoes.
Your
somehow.
practice doesn't round up, because I've heard some people on a podcast I listen to, he gets a call from his lawyer, and he's like, I should just, talk with them for another, it's per hour, another 45 minutes on this other, what he thinks of the baseball team, since it's the full hour he's getting billed for, whatever.
I got to find some clients that are going to agree to me just rounding up. But I haven't done that yet. If you know of any of those clients, feel free to send them my way.
Oh, sure thing, yes. Yeah, it's been a while since I've had to interface with the lawyers, thankfully, I guess. Because most of the time when you deal with the lawyers, it's there's an argument that's trying to be settled, and it's not the happiest time in life most time.
Yeah, it's like saying, I have to go to the doctor, I have to go to the dentist, I have to go talk to my lawyer. Unfortunately, you wish it was perhaps more of a happy profession. But the reality is there are people like me that truly do take joy in what they do. I mean, I love crafting a really compelling argument. Nothing makes me happier than to have a client come in that feels like they were aggrieved and like it just wasn't fair. And I'm like, we're going to get some justice here. And then you find a way to take a horrible situation and flip it around for them and convince the appellate judges or otherwise that, here's how things should be decided. And that makes you feel good. It makes you done something for them that they would not have known how to do on their own, because it's such a specialized thing, much like nobody wants me doing, rocket engineering or brain surgery or any of those other sorts of things. It's a specialized field, but I enjoy providing those services to my clients.
The iPad, in a personal context, do you do anything kind of interesting out of the ordinary? Like, are you a DevonThink user for personal document management, or do you do any kind of just out of the ordinary things with your iPad?
I don't think so. I always hear about that sort of stuff, and I pay attention to those podcasts, but I've never really gotten into like that sphere of cross-linking and all that sort of stuff. It's something that I very much think about, not from a personal standpoint, actually from my day job, because such a big part of being an attorney is working with information, right? And so being able to make the most and make connections between things is actually very important. And so I can understand how those tools could be used by lawyers to be very successful. But for my personal practice, I just haven't found a need to do them. And all of that stuff's in the process of changing, because we are sort of on this cusp of artificial intelligence, and you and I could record another 2-hour podcast talking about AI. It is going to be so transformative in so many fields, and the legals field is definitely one of them, because by its very definition, my job as an appellate attorney, right? I have a record that may have tens of thousands of pages in it, and I need to
the summarize tool. I can imagine will be incredibly useful for your work.
This is the thing, but it can't be take 10,000 pages and give me a 1-paragraph summary. That's useless, right? It needs to be more focused than that. I need to find that needle in the haystack in a way that's, of course, trustworthy and everything else too. And believe me, I'm not the only one that recognizes this. All of the companies, whether they are DMS companies or legal research companies like Westlaw and others, everybody knows this, and everybody is coming out. We already have some things out today that I'm using every day in my practice, and there's going to be more in the future. And I have no doubt that in 5 years' time, the way that I find information on my iPad or on my computer is going to be different because of the use of sophisticated generative AI. And I really look forward to that, and I'm very much paying attention to that stuff. So it's absolutely coming. So that's something that's we've gotten a little far from Devonfield, but in some ways it's all sort of related to that. It's pulling information together and stuff like that. Back to your prior question, though, when it comes to my personal use of the iPad, other than me being very happy, with like photographs and stuff, I love, editing photos. I'll take photos, and sometimes they don't need editing, but if they do, what is the app that I use all the time on my iPad? It's called Photomator, which I really like. It allows me to get
that's my favorite too.
And and I like to make little changes here and there, and it's got some nice tools in it. And if I just want to take something out of the background or something, sometimes I'll have fun scanning a whole bunch of old photos and then trying to, with the technology today, including AI technology, actually, you can sort of bring them to life again and restore them to almost look like they would have looked like back in the day before they faded so much, or even better than they ever looked back in the day. And that's something that I enjoy playing with as well.
Have you experienced the 3D conversion of any of those old scanned photographs? Because that stuff is wild.
So now you're talking again about the Vision Pro. Because,
yes, Vision OS 2, yep.
I have not yet updated to Vision OS 2. I was going to do so about a week or two ago.
What are you waiting on? It's very stable.
I was waiting for the public betas. And there is no public beta.
There is
and
no
so
public
then I'm
beta.
like, okay. Now I realize that I can install the developer beta, and perhaps it's just a title. But I heard somebody, in fact, Tim, it may have been you on the last Vision Pro podcast, talking about how, I have to restart I think you said like you restart your Vision Pro a couple times because you're running the developer beta on it. I don't necessarily.
Yeah, there's some random reboots. That was in the last beta. This current beta, rock solid.
That may have been the phrase that you used. So I just haven't decided. And again, if I'm going to install the beta of anything, I am not going to put a beta on my iPad or my iPhone because I use those things to get work done. I can't have them overheating. I can't have them, random crashes. My Vision Pro, by definition, is a beta device. I paid a lot of money to be an early adopter to see what the future looks like, and love it. It's fantastic. It looks great. So if there's any device I would ever install a beta on, it would be the Vision Pro. I haven't quite done it yet. You're telling me that it would be okay.
Yeah, I'll go for it. Beta 4 is out. It's good. Yeah.
Okay, I'm taking your word for it. So as a result, I'm going to do it this weekend. And if I have any complaints, I'll just direct them to you. Okay.
Yeah, and I must say, even in beta 3, with all the random reboots, it wasn't. It's a quick little reboot. It was your back up and running and all that.
But you're asking the right question because, and again, this gets away from the iPad. But one of the things that I, like everybody else, loves with the Vision Pro is when you watch an immersive video, especially the really nice ones that are done by Apple, those spatial videos. I'm at a loss for words. I've never seen. It's completely transformative. I feel like I'm there, whether I'm watching the woman going across the high wire or watching the people doing the jumping from building to building. I mean, it's so realistic that I'm like, I feel like I'm in this balloon. It's just unbelievable. And although the home videos that I take myself, whether they're with my Vision Pro or with my iPhone using that mode that you can create spatial videos with the iPhone, because they're a little bit smaller, they're not quite the same way, but it's something different. I mean, I could totally understand taking that spatial video of your child blowing out their birthday candle on their first birthday and then looking at that 10, 20, 30 years later and feeling like you're there. That is unlike, it's something that you have to experience it to understand it. So I could not be more excited about it. So the technology that you're talking about, that Apple takes an old photo and makes it 3D, I have seen that before. I have this one friend on Facebook that's got some Facebook plugin that does that, so that as I'm scrolling through Facebook, it takes a 2D photo and it sort of makes it look 3D-ish. But because I'm looking at it on my iPad, it's almost more of a gimmick than anything else. But I do wonder if looking at that with the Vision Pros on is going to be that sort of, wow.
I think you may, for some photos, be in tears looking at some of that stuff because it's well done. I should say,
yeah. I can't wait to try it. Okay, well, I'm going to try it.
Anyways, yes. Are there any apps you wish you could snap into existence that would make your job better? Like, is everything that you want there?
Yeah, I hate to say that I'm pretty good where I am now, but for the most part, I am. I do hate the fact that sometimes, not hate the fact, that's an exaggeration. I described before how I sometimes have to jump into something like Log Me In to get something done. So in a perfect world, there would be this fantastic iPad app for everything. Mail on the iPad would be just as good, not just as good, but have all the features of Outlook on Windows. Or, my document management software on the iPad would be just the same. And the reality is it's not there yet. So, those things in a perfect world I would make better. But the reality is things are pretty good right now. They weren't always this way. There were many years that we were just sort of wishing for things, much like I was telling you before that with my Vision Pro, I'm waiting for MDM software to come across. But, we're in a good place on the iPad right now, for me personally and for attorneys in general and other professionals, that the apps that we need are for the most part there. It doesn't mean that every day creative people aren't coming up with fantastic new apps that do things we've never thought about. Bravo, that's fantastic. Keep that stuff coming. I love it. I review that stuff all the time on my website. But I'm pretty good with where things are right now.
Okay. Has there been anything that you've turned heads into your office with, like, doing something on the iPad with, like, oh, how'd you do that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's some of the stuff we've talked about. For lawyers specifically, working with transcripts, the way that I work with Transcript Pad, that's something that when other lawyers see me do that, they immediately get it. They're like, oh, wow, I can start doing that now. And another thing is, I mentioned before how when I take handwritten notes in GoodNotes, and then I'll have like a specific GoodNotes folder associated with this particular case, the idea that I can just do a search, because it does OCR of my handwriting, that the idea I could do a search and I can say, within a second, I can pull up whatever my client told me 9 months ago about some topic that's now important today. People look at me and they're like, oh my goodness. And likewise, the idea that with PDF Expert, I can keep all the documents, every pleading, every document that was ever filed in a lawsuit, I can have right there in a folder. And so if I'm talking to somebody and they say, oh, well, in that summary judgment motion that was filed 2 years ago, in 2 seconds, I'm like, oh yeah, I see this. It's right here on page 3. Other attorneys will some like, wow, and that is sort of the epitome of the iPad or the iPhone sort of being your second brain. It just says everything you need. And that really has been a big part of my practice. And when other lawyers see it, they will often come up to me afterwards and say, hey, how can I do that too? Because they instantly understand how useful that can be.
Yeah. As far as Apple Intelligence, is that going to be something you'll be able to start implementing the writing and text manipulation stuff right away, you think? Or has your practice had meetings about like AI uses in our office and what's allowed, what's not allowed kind of thing?
Yeah, we talked about this a second ago, how transformative AI is going to be for the legal world. And we actually have been talking about that very issue, whether it's decisions that we make or sometimes some of our bigger clients are starting to come with us with like their client guidelines. If you're going to represent company XYZ, we require these things. And one of the things that we're starting to see with client requirements is, you need to let us know if you're using AI. And something that broad, I actually think is ridiculous because
what is AI?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's a service called Westlaw that lawyers use for legal research that's got an AI part of it, and I use it every day. It doesn't mean
it's transcribing audio and the text AI.
Yeah,
I guess it is.
That's a little bit short-sighted. I mean, what they're really saying is not double-checking your work. But again, a client should not need to tell you, double-check your work. Don't be like these attorneys that go to ChatGPT and it spits out a quote-unquote legal opinion that it just made up out of thin air, and then you're providing that to the court as if it's something real. I mean, that's not an indictment of AI, that's an indictment of poor lawyering, which could exist in so many different formats. So, I mean, believe me, you're asking a legitimate question because clients are talking to me about this stuff all the time, and we're thinking about it as a law firm all the time. But I really do think it just goes back to the idea of double checking things, being trustworthy. It's really not any different from the question of, can I bring a younger attorney on board with me to a project? Are they experienced enough to understand what they're doing? Well, the answer is you're going to be working with them and double checking them, and we're all learning. And it's just another example of the same thing. AI is just that virtual version of bringing on an associate, whether it be somebody within your own company or somebody from outside to help you, but you still need to watch the work that you do. So it is an issue that I look at, but at the end of the day, to a certain degree, I think it's much ado about nothing.
And then something I noticed on your website that I love is that you list off pretty much every computer and iPad and phone you've ever had, which I just love, just like going back to the list of all this stuff. Do you have a favorite iPad from that list, or is kind of the newest the best by default kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite is the newest by default, but the one that jumps out at me was that first generation iPad Pro with the larger size for the reasons that we talked about.
Yeah.
Because it really was one of those, you look back in time at where was there like a real significant change. For me, that was a big change, is having the bigger screen. And ironically, in the iPhone world, it's been the same thing for me, because it was not that many years ago that Apple came out with the larger iPhones, and I used to say, those things are too big. I'm not going to get the Plus version or the Max version. I don't need to be like Maxwell Smart with something the size of my shoe up to my face. I need something smaller in my pocket, right? But over the years, Apple has added other features to its largest phone, and this past fall, when Apple came out with the 15 Pro, where the Max had like even better zoom capability and stuff like that, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get this iPhone 15 Pro Max, and I'm either going to decide it was a mistake, and next year I'll go back, or much like that bigger iPad, I will never go back. And I am here to tell you, I will never go back. Once you get used to the bigger size, yes, it's a little bigger in my pocket. Yes, it's a little more cumbersome to hold. But just having that bigger screen on the iPhone, much like the bigger screen on my iPad, the advantages, definitely outweigh the disadvantages.
Yeah, I will say iPhones are too big, but also, I went from a 12 mini to a Pro Max, and I'm sticking with the Pro Max. Yeah. I'd love a mini Pro, but they won't make that.
That'd be funny though. Yeah.
That would be. Well, there's the slim rumors and the foldables. We'll see how that all shakes out.
Yeah.
Well, anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to before we wrap it up?
No, I think that's about it. So I would encourage people. I mean, if anything that I've talked about is of interest to you, check out my website, iPhoneJD.com, where, again, from the title alone, it sounds like it's for lawyers, and it definitely is. If you're a lawyer listening to this, you got to come on board. But even if you're not, if you're somebody who uses an iPhone or an iPad to get work done, that's the sort of stuff that I've been writing about since 2008, and I'd love to have you read it if you're interested in blogs. And then the other thing I'll mention is if you enjoy podcasts, and obviously you do if you're listening to this, I have a weekly podcast that I do with my buddy Brett Burney, who's another legal professional, but we don't really talk about legal stuff. It's called In the News. And the reason that it came up is many, many years ago, when things were slow on my website, I was like, well, I should at least write something. And so on a Friday, I thought, let me just sort of look at the things that are going on in the worlds of Apple mobile technology, and I'll just have sort of like a link post of like, here's 10 articles you might want to read. And so I called that post In the News, and I've had those In the News posts for many, many, many years now. And so years ago, Brett, who I had known from legal circles, said, I'd love to do a podcast. Why don't we do a podcast together where you're already doing the work at the end of the week to talk about the news of the day in the world of Apple mobile technology? Why not have a podcast that we'll record to talk about it? And so every Thursday night, I put together that post, which comes out on Friday morning. And then every Friday morning, Brett and I record the podcast called In the News. So it's inthenewspodcast.com. So there's many other podcasts like that, but I think we've got something pretty special going. If anyone listening to this wants to check us out, go to inthenewspodcast.com. Every Friday afternoon and every weekend, you'll get to listen to me and Brett talk about what's going on in the world of Apple news. And we have a lot of fun with our podcast. It's really fun.
Very cool. Yeah. Definitely check that out. One thing I wanted to ask you about, I know like some doctors can't watch any doctor TV shows because some stuff doesn't ring true home or whatever. Do the law TV shows like Presumed Innocence? Have you checked any of those out? Do you have any thoughts on law and TV?
Just the opposite. I eat that stuff up. I love reading a good John Grisham, Scott Turow novel or seeing it on TV as much now as ever. And to be specific, Apple TV Plus, I think Apple's done a fantastic job with that. They've taken over the job of HBO as producing some of the best content that's out there. Not every show is the best, but some of the shows, Ted Lasso, Severance, Presumed Innocent, for example. I loved that book when I read it. It was very formative. It came out just as I was starting law school.
Interesting.
90s. And then I loved the movie when Harrison Ford was in it.
Yeah, in high school, I must have watched that movie like 20 times, the John Williams score to it, and I just love that one. So I knew kind of where the show was headed, but thankfully slightly different ending. So when I heard that Apple was coming out with a series on it, I was very excited, and my wife and I did not watch the second to last episode because we wanted to wait for the last episode to come out so we could watch them both together, because I knew when I watched that second to last one I was going to want to watch the last one. And so right now, as I'm talking to you, I think we're going to watch them finally tonight and watch those last two episodes. But no, I love watching legal stuff. I know many lawyers, like you said, they don't want to think about the law outside of it. I really enjoy the law, and I'm happy to watch the made-up version of it, which is often more exciting than my everyday law job is. But I love watching all of it. I think Bryan Cranston had a law-focused one with his son and the mob or something. Yeah, that was a really well-done one as well.
That one was actually filmed here in New Orleans. Actually, no, they might be talking about a different one. I was thinking about...
that might have been on Showtime or something.
Yeah, that was My Honor on Showtime, and that was
that's what I'm thinking of. Yep.
So.
Yeah. Well, anyways, thank you so much for your time, Jeff. This has been a great chat. Love learning more about what you do with the iPad in law. So thank you.
I love listening to your podcast, and I'm thrilled to be able to be a part of one of them. So thanks so much. It was great talking to you.
Well, that's my interview with Jeff. My thanks again to Jeff for his time recording. My thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. Make sure to check out Jeff's podcast at inthenewspodcast.com. And my thanks once again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of Apple Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com. Download Agenda today for free on all of your Apple devices. Early access to this podcast and Vision Pros is available via Apple Podcasts and over at Patreon. Subscribe today at patreon.com/ApplePros. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.